Hello and welcome back to Get Up in Game. My name's Josh and today I'm going to be talking about Marvel Champions. And when I say that, I mean I'm talking about all of Marvel Champions. Because if you haven't heard, at Gen Con 2022, which recently wrapped up, Fantasy Flight Games all but told us that the next 2 cycles at least are all going to be focused on the X-Men. So that makes now an excellent time to just go back and take stock of everything that's come out for the game so far and bask in its greatness. After all, once the X-Men get here, if you're anything like me, you're not going to be seeing any of these heroes or villains for a little while. Or maybe you're jumping into the game because the X-Men are coming out and you just want to see everything that's currently available. Either way, that makes now an excellent time to revisit everything we've seen from the game and relive all its highs and admittedly a few lows. So what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be going through every product one after another and just briefly reviewing everything that's come out, talking about key cards, the best heroes, maybe some of the least best heroes, and just see how well they did as we move into the next sort of phase of the game. So I'm just going to be hanging out here on hallofheroeslcg.com, an excellent resource for the game. They've got all the cards on here, and I'm just going to go through every product step by step. Now, obviously, we're going to start with the Marvel Champions core set, which was an excellent way to start out playing this game. I'm not going to spend too much time on the heroes in this box, just because, frankly, you have to buy this box to play this game. So it doesn't really matter what I think of the heroes, though I will say that they are all still pretty darn good to this day. Spider-Man was the way you were meant to learn the game, and I think that made a lot of sense. He's very popular, and his abilities were really straightforward. Made a lot of sense to new players. He still plays very well. So I'm very happy that they had Spider-Man in the original box here. Captain Marvel remains one of the strongest heroes to this day. You know, if you were worried about power creep, I will say newer heroes are all very strong, but Captain Marvel is still right up there as one of the strongest heroes in the game, so we definitely got a heavy hitter right out of the box. She-Hulk sort of resides on the other side of the power spectrum as far as Captain Marvel's concerned. She's still very fun to play. Her hero kit might not have been as finely tuned as some of the others. There are some cards that probably don't get played terribly often, but she still has a lot of fun things that she can do. 1-2 punch is a lot of fun. Split personality remains one of my favorite cards in the entire game that lets you change form and draw back up to your hand size. Still not a lot of cards in the game that do anything similar to that, so She-Hulk has a lot of really cool things going for her, so definitely was worth including in the core set. Iron Man remains a favorite of many players to this day, as far as I can tell, the way people talk about him very highly. He has just a lot of really strong events, good support, and building that armor never gets old. Once you get the reactor, the armor, the helmet, and then the gauntlets and boots down, he just completely takes control of the game, and it is just great fun every single time you do it. And then the final hero in the core set was Black Panther, who plays somewhat similarly to Iron Man as far as he wants to get his upgrades on the table, though he activates them with his Wakanda Forever card, so he plays very differently. He has great resources with Vibranium, excellent card draw with the Golden City, and he just brings a really solid, consistent hero to the board. So there were 5 great heroes in the core set to start the game off. Now, one of the things I want to be talking about with every product is some of the key deck building cards that came out. Now, obviously, the core set should have a lot of really strong deck building cards, and it kind of did and it kind of didn't. Mockingbird, certainly a staple for a long time. It's always nice to stun the villain. Nick Fury remains one of the absolute best cards in the game to this day, if not the best card in the game. Emergency first aid's okay. Haymaker probably doesn't get played much. Of course, we got the double resource cards, so you get those with almost every deck. Avengers Mansion and Helicarrier are still very useful cards in certain builds. And as far as the aspect cards, Hulk sees a lot of play still, I think. Relentless Assault, a lot of these red cards are still very good. Uppercut, so-so. Of course, the double resource cards. Tac Team is okay. Combat Training, you'll still see in a lot of decks to this day. The leadership cards are really nice. Hawkeye, Maria Hill, Vision, all really good allies. Vision got played a lot early in the game, maybe not so much these days. Here and there, but Maria Hill is still absolutely incredible, and Hawkeye is great in the right scenarios. Make the Calls, one of the probably most broken cards, or at least one of the best cards in the whole game. And Inspired, you'll still see in a lot of Voltron builds, so just still a lot of good cards that came straight from the core set. Protection suffered a bit. These cards weren't as useful. Black Widow and Luke Cage were both interesting allies, but not always the best. Counterpunch is okay depending on your hero. I don't think Get Behind Me saw much play here and there. Med Team can be pretty good. It's nice that it can heal allies. Armored Vest, of course, is always going to be useful. Indomitable, just so-so. Justice did pretty well for itself in the core set. Daredevil and Jessica Jones were decent allies, for Justice is still a great threat removal card. I don't know that Interrogation Room sees a lot of play. Surveillance Team has some new life recently. Heroic Intuition is still a very useful card. So there were lots of good deck building cards, though I will say the deck building options in the core set days were definitely limited. The decks all looked pretty similar, which is what you'd expect from an LCG, but we were still ready for some new content as soon as possible. After you played the game a few times, you started to get tired of all the same cards. Now, the villains in the core set, I think, is where maybe the core set shines the most. They did a great job of giving you 3 very different villains that played differently, but also had really nice scale to difficulty. Rhino is sort of considered the tutorial villain. I don't know if I really like that for him, just because he plays pretty differently than most other villains. His scheme only has 7 threat on its one side, and if you lose that, you lose the game. So Rhino kind of taught players not to go to alter ego, which is kind of funny because that's one of the main things about the game, but Rhino made you terrified of it, and I think that lesson stuck a little bit too hard for some of us for a long time, where we never really wanted to go to alter ego, thanks to all the traumatic losses to Rhino by trying to flip down. But he plays very simply. He mostly just attacks you over and over again. He doesn't do anything too complicated. So he plays well for an intro scenario as far as his simplicity, but I don't know. He's okay for that. I actually prefer the next villain, Claw, as I think this is a great intro scenario. Now it's definitely harder to win than Rhino, but he just makes things really interesting. He's got a little bit more going on. You can somewhat safely flip to alter ego since he has two main schemes. So if you lose one, you don't lose the game. I like that. I like his unpredictability as far as how he attacks. Now, I do find Claw to be incredibly annoying, to be honest. He has a lot of effects that exhaust you and stun you. There's a lot of guard minions, which can be annoying. But overall, he's a really good challenge, and he was definitely a step up in difficulty. So after you'd played Rhino a few times, which you moved on to Claw, you felt the difference, and you really felt like you accomplished something when you did manage to beat Claw. And the final villain in the core set was Ultron, and this is where I'm so pleased. I think Ultron is still one of the best villains in the game, and coming from having played the Lord of the Rings living card game through the core set, and of course the Arkham Horror card game in their core set, the third scenario in both of those boxes has all been impossible with just core set cards. They are very, very difficult, and probably overly so. But here, Ultron is definitely difficult, and more difficult than Claw most of the time, but he's not impossible. You could beat Ultron even with just the core set, and he's a really, really fun villain to play. I still play him fairly occasionally now, and so I'm just very, very pleased with how things turned out. Now, he's pretty straightforward too. He mostly just pumps out drones, and you just have to learn how to deal with the drones. But he's just really, really fun. He has a lot of hit points. He likes to heal a lot, so he can be a little bit of a longer game. But that's all right. We're playing a game we enjoy, so it's okay if it takes longer. And so, yeah, the 3 villains in the core set were just fantastic. Of course, you get the standard encounter set, which sort of makes the game go. Expert if you're feeling cheeky. And then the thing that makes Marvel Champions so special, and they started with this with Lord of the Rings and Arkham, but here, now that we have these modular sets and they are interchangeable, in those games, you had to set the scenario up the way it was meant to be set up. Here, the modular sets are interchangeable, so they add a lot of variety to the game, and there's a lot of different kinds of modular sets. We see here Bomb Scare, which is still probably one of the easiest ones, but it's nice if you're playing a hard villain, you can throw this in and it makes it a little bit easier. It's got a little bit of everything. The Masters of Evil modular set introduced the concept of sort of a beefy minion encounter set, where if you just want to go up against a lot of other tough minions, you could throw these guys in there and give you a lot of stuff to attack. That one's can be pretty tough. Under Attack was one that sort of beefed up the villain with a couple pieces of armor and weapons that could go on the villain. So this one sort of introduces a different way of playing the game. Legions of Hydra, still one of the hardest encounter sets in the whole game. When this thing comes out, It is just absolutely terrifying. It's so hard to get rid of. Madam Hydra and Legions of Hydra, these two work in tandem. And it also comes with a lot of guard minions. So this was a way to really increase the difficulty if you found the game to be a little too easy after you'd played it a few times. And the Doomsday Chair, if you really wanted to make it more difficult, this one introduced the concept of the boss type modular encounter set, where there's just really one minion and a bunch of cards that either beef up that minion or summon that minion. So if you put this Doomsday Chair in your deck, you're definitely all but guaranteed to be seeing MODOK. And you can see here he has 8 hit points, Retaliate 2. He's absolutely terrifying. And so it was just really neat to see right from the core set that the modular encounter sets had a lot of variety to them. They weren't very similar at all. They all did very different things. And we see that continue throughout the course of the game. So the first release after the core set was the Green Goblin scenario pack. And I thought that was a really excellent direction to go. You know, we still had 5 heroes to play with, but really it's the villains that make the game feel really different. And so it was nice to get 2 more scenarios. And they are both really good. Now, I'll admit that Risky Business probably isn't one of the best scenarios in the game, and it's certainly not the best scenario in this pack. But it did introduce the idea of the villain having an alter ego side similar to how the heroes, and he flips back and forth. So it's a really neat idea. Unfortunately, it is a little gameable, and so you can sort of hang out on the Norman Osborn side, and it's not too hard to build up your board state and then move into the Green Goblin fight. But it still can be a lot of fun as he flips back and forth. He deals a lot of indirect damage to you, and sometimes it can be difficult to keep him on the Green Goblin side, and that's the only side you can damage him on. So if he keeps going back to Norman Osborn, running back to the office, you can't defeat him. So this one can still give you trouble here and there, but I would say it's one of the easier scenarios. But really, you're buying this pack for this one right here, the Mutagen Formula scenario. This is one of the best scenarios in the game to this day, where you're fighting Green Goblin, and he is just pumping out minions. Oh, minion after minion after minion. All the Goblin soldiers, all the Goblin thralls, or 6 Goblin thralls in the pack. 4 Goblin soldiers. There's always minions in front of you, and it can be really fun. Certainly for certain types of heroes like Thor and Valkyrie that like to fight minions, but even just any hero, it provides such a good challenge. This was probably the most difficult scenario at the time when it came out. And it still remains a pretty decent challenge for a lot of heroes. There's a couple really nasty. This monster is just gigantic. Well, he stuns you when he comes to play. There's a lot of really cool cards, and this is just such a fun scenario. So this was a great pack, a good follow-up to the core set. And this one also included some modular encounter sets. Goblin Gimmicks is also probably on the easier side down there with Bomb Scare, but it's just neat to sort of beef up the villain with this type of modular encounter set. And then it gave us 3 boss type encounter sets that featured some of Spider-Man's villains, which was really cool. We got Scorpion Pack here that could go in the deck that would stun you quite a bit. We get the Power Drain one featuring Electro that would deal a lot of indirect damage to you if you weren't careful. And the Running Interference set with Tombstone, which really messed with the way encounter cards worked, with the media coverage here that actually makes the when revealed effects trigger twice. And just a really scary boss there in Tombstone with 9 health. So this was a great pack and a really good start to the expanded nature of the game. But after that, the players were definitely ready for some new heroes to play with, and they were definitely going to be getting them. So the first hero pack that came out was Captain America. And Captain America taught us very quickly that they were not afraid to make heroes very strong. It was pretty clear right from the start when you played Cap that you were playing probably the strongest hero in the game up to that point. Or at least he's right up there with Captain Marvel. Cap can pretty much just do everything. His board control with his ability to ready is just so effortless. You don't need any cards in play to be able to just handle most of the threats in front of you. And then he just has cards that do everything you need him to do. He can thwart very well. He can stun. And he was particularly well set up against the villains in the core set. He had shield block to deal with all of Rhino's many attacks. He could easily ready himself if Claw exhausted him. And the shield gives him retaliate, so he could easily deal with the Ultron drones. It just felt like you could take Cap up against any of the core set villains, and he was going to do really well. And then he even has the shield toss to help deal with the Green Goblin and all his minions. So it was just really well set up against all the villains that were out up to that point in the game. And he is still just one of the best heroes. He has a little bit of everything. He can do it all. As far as the deck building cards that came with him, he came with a leadership pack, and he introduced a lot of really good leadership cards that took blue over the top for a while, with Squirrel Girl being an excellent ally. The Avengers Assemble is an expensive card, but you could really make a lot of fun use with it because it comboed so well with strength in numbers down here that let you draw a lot of cards, and this became a staple deck type for a while to come. The Avengers Tower here in the pack was also a very welcome card to get at that point in the game. Everybody was an Avengers, so Avengers Tower was just always pretty much going to be useful. So yeah, Cap was just a really, really good deck to get right off the bat. Excellent first hero. Now, Ms. Marvel came out and took things in a completely different direction. While she is also very strong, she does it in a much less straightforward manner than Captain America. Her ability to return events to her hand makes her very combo-y and just very fun to bounce things back and forth. You can increase the value of those events with cards like Embiggen and Shrink. She had a lot of alter ego supports, which if people were afraid of going to alter ego after playing Rhino, they were going to have to learn how to do it to play Ms. Marvel, because all of her best things tend to happen when she's in her alter ego form. She gets a lot of extra cards and extra resources and just a lot of extra control over the game if she can flip down, and she wants to frequently. Her deck building cards probably weren't quite as strong as Cap's. Unfortunately, Protection took a little while to get going. Preemptive Strike was a really good early card, as was Tackle. You can never underestimate the value of Stun. It's just a very useful thing. The 3 damage there is negligible almost compared to just how useful it is to stun the villain. Energy barriers are really strong. Okay, I take it back. Her deck building cards are pretty good. Lockjaw has always been a great card. Endurance, yeah, what was I? Her deck building cards were just fine. I forgot she had a lot of these really good ones. Concussive Blow was also really good. And some of these cards work pretty well for her. Melee works, always seemed like it was really just meant for her and didn't probably see much play outside of her deck. Downtime was okay. I don't think you need endurance and downtime. It's kind of funny they came in the same pack. But yeah, Ms. Marvel, certainly one of my favorite heroes to play, and still a really fun one, especially with the new champion support that we've gotten recently. The next thing that came out for the game was the Wrecking Crew scenario pack, and this might have been the first miss as far as some players were concerned. Now, this is a really fun scenario. It comes with 4 villains, and you have to fight them all at the same time, and they each have their own encounter deck. And it's a really interesting concept. Unfortunately, there is no way to modify the deck whatsoever. The experience is pretty much the same thing every time you fight the Wrecking Crew. So while it is fun, and it definitely encourages you to come up with certain strategies to take all these big enemies down, once you've done it 2 or 3 times, you probably don't really need to go back and do it again. So since you can't include modular encounter sets, you don't even include the standard or expert encounter sets, there's not a lot of variety here, and Marvel Champions is really built on variety. So if you were looking to add some things to your collection, this is probably among the last things you would acquire. But I think it's fun every now and then. It's certainly not terrible, but it was probably the weakest thing to come out up to this point. Next up is the Thor Hero Pack, and near as I can remember, people thought this was a bit of a miss as well. He has a lot of things going for him, a lot of really cool cards. Unfortunately, his hand size is only 4 in hero size and only 5 in alter ego. This was kind of a new idea, though She-Hulk had a 4 hand size in her hero form, but at least she had 6 in alter ego. Thor felt sort of hampered right off the bat, which was strange because when Thor was coming out, everybody felt like, oh, he'll definitely be the most powerful because he's Thor. And it just didn't feel like it worked out that way. Now, he definitely grew into being one of just a great hero. I don't know if he's one of the strongest. I was about to say that, but I don't know if he's one of the strongest. But he grew into being a really fun hero. He has a lot of cool cards, a lot of things going for him. And some more recent cards have worked to make him stronger to help overcome his small hand size. That's really the main thing. He has excellent resource generation. He can hit really hard. He has a ton of health. You can make use of that as a resource. So, and I think he's a lot of fun. His ability to draw cards when minions come into play, which was meant to overcome the small hand size, is just an absolute blast, especially now that there's more cards to summon minions into play, even during the player phase, though he has a little bit of that as well. It can be a lot of fun to play, but sometimes it can be hard to get started with him if the minions don't happen to come out early. You just feel like you don't have enough cards, and his kit can be a little expensive at times. Hammer Throw costs 3 and requires you to return the hammer to your hand, which means you have to pay another one to play it at some point. So I think Thor was a little bit of a disappointment when he first came out, but I think he's gotten a lot better, and I certainly really enjoy him. As far as his deck building cards go, I don't remember what came with Thor, so let's just take a look together here. Hercules and Valkyrie. I don't know. I never played those allies much. Get Over Here works very well for Thor. Mean Swing was a great card with him and has really certain heroes. Black Panther really likes Mean Swing and some newer heroes as well. Hall of Heroes is excellent. Yarnborn as well. So he had some decent deck building cards. Under Surveillance is an absolute staple in Justice decks most of the time. Teamwork's not that great. Second Wind's not that great. And the enhanced resource cards are so-so. So yeah, that's Thor. Probably a medium quality pack. Certainly at the time, though I think he has gotten better. Next up is Black Widow, and she sort of introduced an entirely new way to play the game. With her focus on bringing preparations into play and then triggering during the villain phase, really showed early on the creativity of the designers of this game. She felt very, very different from every other hero that had come out to that point. She has a lot of really strong cards, but she just plays very differently. You just lay a lot of things down and then wait and see what the villain does and decide if you're going to allow it to happen or not, or punish them for doing the things they want to do. It can really be a lot of fun. She's gotten not a lot of support in the idea of preparation cards, but there have been a lot of cards that have come out to make her even stronger over the last couple years. And Black Widow is definitely a very, very fun hero. I think this one was received pretty highly, if I remember correctly. People really liked this one. And yeah, this is a good pack. Now, as far as the deck building cards, Agent Coulson and Quake are both very good allies. If nothing else, Justice just needed a 2-cost ally as a chump blocker, so Quake was welcome even just for that. But she's nice if you flip down and they happen to have minions that she can deal some damage to them when they scheme. Agent Coulson can summon preparations to your hand. Very helpful for her, but just helpful in general. It feels like Stealth Strike should get more play than it does. It's a really cool card, but I don't feel like I see it much. More surveillance teams, more interrogation rooms. Probably didn't need more of those in your box. Counterintelligence is a pretty good card. You can use that to help flip down. Spycraft is very useful, sort of a cancel that anybody can use as long as you control a spy. And since Coulson can go get it, you control a spy. This is where we got our first Quinn carrier, so she was almost worth it just for that card. Very, very good. And and she came with Rapid Response, which is still one of the best leadership cards to this day. So definitely a very, very good pack. And yeah, so that is Black Widow, a very fun hero and definitely was worth including. Doctor Strange here was probably the first controversial hero. When he came out, it became very evident very quickly that he was by far the most powerful hero in the game. His deck of invocation cards are just head and shoulders above everything else in the game, probably still. And it's so easy for him to cycle through them and play them over and over and over that it almost doesn't even matter all the other cards in his kit, which most of them are pretty decent. But it's really all about just playing those invocation cards over and over. And I think a lot of players, once they first got a hold of him, they played him a few times and just they thought he was too strong. He sort of trivialized a lot of the villains that were out at the time. And so I think Doctor Strange sort of came and went as far as players' excitement. We didn't play a ton of him. Now I've kind of always liked him. I don't mind when heroes are overpowered. It's just kind of fun to beat up on the villain to do well. So I've always liked Doctor Strange, but he definitely gets a bad rap these days. As far as his deck building cards, see, Brother Voodoo and Clea are both very decent protection allies. So protection needed some help. Ms. Marvel had introduced some pretty good cards, but it was definitely lagging behind in the aspects as far as quality. People really didn't like playing protection. Certainly in solo, it was very difficult. Iron Fist is an excellent ally. So there were definitely good allies in this pack. Desperate Defense is a very good card. Momentum Shift is pretty good. The Night Nurse is very, very good and Unflappable. Yeah, I think once Doctor Strange came out, there are a lot of really good protection cards in this pack. Probably didn't need these 3 warnings, though. But yeah, very, very good. Skilled Strike sees play in a lot of Rush decks, Sorcerer Supreme, and every Mystic deck. Foiled is pretty good. I don't know how much play it sees, but it's good. And the Iron Man ally for leadership led to a lot of really, really fun decks. So the Doctor Strange pack is still very good for the deck building cards, if nothing else. But a very, very strong hero, but maybe a little too strong for some people's tastes. And the final hero in the first cycle was the Incredible Hulk. Sadly, his hero kit is considered to be not so incredible by most people. Hulk was probably the biggest disappointment in the game so far. We went from Doctor Strange being so overpowered to the Hulk being pretty underpowered and just felt just really pigeonholed into one role. He was just going to attack straight forward and do nothing else, which is fine because it's what you kind of think of when you think of the Hulk, but it would have been nice if there was maybe a little more nuance to him and his shortcomings of having a small hand size and his inability to hold on to cards from turn to turn. Even though that's generally not a great strategy anyway, it would have been nice to have the option. Combined with Bruce Banner not being a very good alter ego, it just made him very difficult to play. Now he has 18 hit points, so that's kind of nice, gives you time to get set up. And he has a lot of really fun cards to play. They feel a little overcosted, but he has these limitless strengths here that give him 3 resources. So there are very good things about Hulk. I don't think he's terrible, but he was definitely pretty disappointing. I think people were really looking forward to seeing how they would handle the Hulk, and it felt like they just really nerfed him when we'd hoped he would just be really, really strong. Thankfully, his deck building cards are pretty good, if I remember. Now, none of these allies are that stupendous, but he had Dropkick, and Dropkick is one of the best red cards. I absolutely love Dropkick. It's really good. Toe-to-Toe is an interesting card that might see play every now and then. Martial Prowess is an excellent, excellent card to help pay for attack events. So he has a couple really key cards for aggression. And he came with the Beat Cop, which was huge for Justice. That was a really, really popular card for a long time. And Electrostatic Armor saw some play, sort of a double retaliate enabler, which was pretty neat. And so Hulk, again, if you're looking for something to add to your collection, might be one of the lower ones on the list, but he can still be a lot of fun to play, and he comes with some good cards. And that leads us to the Rise of the Red Skull campaign expansion. Now, if people were starting to get a little nervous about the quality control of Fantasy Flight games, what with Doctor Strange being a little overpowered and Hulk being pretty underpowered, I'm happy to say the Rise of Red Skull came out and corrected everybody's fears. This was an excellent, excellent product, and still continues to be one of the first things people are recommended to buy after the core set. It comes with 2 heroes and 5 villains. I'll talk about the heroes first. We have Hawkeye, who is just so much fun. He felt pretty different from everybody else up to the point when he came out. He still feels pretty unique. He has a pretty singular focus on his arrows, but they're fun to play because they all do different things. He has a really good signature ally with Bobby Morse Mockingbird. The arrows all introduce different status effects and things like that, which are really, really fun. He has ways to pay for them and ways to search for them. So he just plays really straightforwardly. It almost doesn't matter what kind of deck you build for him. You're really just going to be shooting the arrows. But he is a lot of fun to play. Now, as far as his deck building cards go, they were so-so. Hawkeye, Black Knight, and Goliath are all, and U.S. Agent are all okay allies that saw a little bit of play maybe, but nothing too special. The Sky Cycle can be fun with certain combo builds. Team Training was a very useful card. Ready for Action, I think, was pretty underrated for a long time. That's a very useful card. And so he had decent cards. You get another Avengers Tower. Earth's Mightiest Heroes is a very, very good card that you could go back and use, and some of the core set heroes played very well with them. And so yeah, that was Hawkeye. He was pretty good, but the real star of the show when it comes to the Rise of the Red Skull, to me it's all about Spider-Woman. I think she was probably the most fun hero that was available when she came out, or she's right up towards the top. She's just such a blast. Her ability to include cards from 2 different aspects opened up a whole new world of deck building. She's a very strong signature ally in Captain Marvel, lets you draw cards, which is always useful. And her hero kit is just spectacular. She has cards to pay for, aspect cards. She can do a little bit of everything. She can deal damage. She can gain tough. She can stun and confuse. She can heal. She can remove threat. It just all works very well. Her kit plays just spectacularly well. She has 3 cards that ready her, which is good with her ability to increase her stats whenever she plays cards from different aspects. Everything about Spider-Woman, I think, is just on point, and she's worth buying the box for just for her. Even if you don't like Hawkeye, Spider-Woman is fantastic. Now let's take a look at her deck building cards. Spider-Girl, anytime you see this big old number 2 in the top left corner, the ally is at least decent, and Spider-Girl's pretty good. Probably didn't need more tack teams in your box. Press the Advantage is an interesting card. Piercing Strike is an interesting card. All right, her deck building cards aren't blowing me away here. The Spider-Man ally is expensive, but very good. Skilled Investigator was a great card. That was a very good addition to the Justice pool. And Clear the Area. This is huge. This is still one of the best threat removal cards in the game. It's very simple. Just takes 2 threat off the scheme, and they'll let you draw a card if you cleared it. That's actually really, really nice for one. It's a very useful card. So Spider-Woman, her deck building cards were here and there, but as her hero, she's very, very, very good. Now the villains were probably even more welcome to the players because it had been almost a year at this point since we had gotten new villains in the game. So it was very, very nice to have some new people to battle against. So here we have Crossbones was the first of 5. He's pretty straightforward. He's not terribly difficult most of the time, but he does include the Legions of Hydra encounter set in his set if you don't change it up. And if that comes out, that just makes any game harder to deal with. So he's a fun intro villain. He was a good first villain to fight in the box, and he's still pretty good to test decks against. He's a challenge, not overly easy, but not terribly difficult. Absorbing Man is one of the few misses in the game as far as villains go. He's just not very fun to play. He doesn't do much of anything, unfortunately. His scheme is very easy to deal with. It has 12 threat, so it's very easy to just hang out and take your time beating him up. His cards, it seemed like an interesting concept where he gains different traits, and then the cards act differently depending on which trait he currently has, but overall, it's a pretty big encounter deck too with all the other cards that you have to put in there. So you don't see him doing the cool stuff he's supposed to do most of the time. Probably the easiest villain to beat in the game and kind of boring to play against, unfortunately. But thankfully, Taskmaster is still, in my opinion, one of the most fun villains to play against in the game, as long as you're not looking for a huge challenge. He's not terribly difficult, but he is just a lot of fun because he allows you to rescue these heroes that he has kidnapped. They're these 4 zero-cost allies that you can rescue through a side scheme, and it just makes them a lot of fun to play. You trying to get these allies out, and they're very, very strong, and it just makes for a lot of fun. He himself, his ability to deal damage every time you flip forms into your hero form can be pretty unpredictable, and so that makes that pretty fun. You don't really know what to expect when you fight him. I don't think I lose to Taskmaster terribly often, but I play him a lot because I think he's just really, really fun to battle against. Zola, this is where the box finally steps up the difficulty quite a bit. Zola's pretty tough. He's still pretty tough. Just having that built-in retaliate, it's amazing how annoying that is. How much of a difference taking 1 damage every time you attack really is. That adds up quickly. It just eats your allies alive, and he can just be incredibly difficult. And it's hard to attack him anyway because he has so many just massive villains or minions that come out to help him. They don't look that bad when they first come out, but he is constantly attaching various things to them, giving them just guard and extra hit points, making them more difficult to kill with a ton of extra health. They are incredibly annoying, boosting their stats. If you put some of the big beefy minion modular encounter sets in with Zola, you're in for a world of hurt. Though it's a lot of fun and it's a great challenge. He's a really good villain. It's a good scenario to battle against. I really, really like it, but it's pretty tough. To this day, he remains a decently challenging villain. And then the star of the show is Red Skull, who is a fantastic scenario. He is really interesting in that you put all the side schemes into one separate deck, and then you pop one out every turn, and you have to deal with these because Red Skull gets stronger for the number of side schemes that are out. So no matter what encounter sets you're using, all the side schemes go into the deck, which can create some very interesting combos. But his side schemes in particular, some of them can be very nasty. Though it's fun because some of them can actually help you, which is kind of rare. You don't see that a lot in these games, that when you defeat some of his side schemes, you actually get benefits, which is really fun. He has the sleeper minion, which is really scary. I will say, if you're playing the campaign, I didn't talk about the campaign much because I haven't been much of a campaign player in my career as a Marvel Champions player. If you play him in the campaign, he can be pretty easy because you've built up your heroes to a certain point, and the villains probably don't get built up quite as much as you do. But if you play him standalone outside of the campaign, which is what I normally do, he can be pretty challenging. If you do not have a plan for dealing with all the side schemes that are coming out, he can just get ahead of you, and it's really, really hard to get caught up. But I really, really like Red Skull, and he was just a great boss to this first campaign box. They did an excellent job. Now, as far as the modular encounter sets that came in this box, we have the Hydra Assault, which just added some of sort of medium to small minions, which is kind of nice. This is an easier encounter set, but it's still kind of fun to throw in every now and again, especially if you're playing another villain that uses Hydra cards. It can spice things up. The Weapon Master one is pretty easy. It's one of the ones that beefs up the villain more than anything, but it is fun to have here and there. Hydra Patrol, also pretty easy. I'm starting to see a theme. This box was a little bit easier overall, I would say. Red Skull and Zola were somewhat challenging for sure, but overall, the game felt a little easy at this point, and these modular encounter sets certainly weren't doing anything to change that. The Hydra Patrol was a really easy set. Experimental Weapons really doesn't even work as an encounter set so much as it was meant to be paired with Crossbones, though you could throw it in the set and the villain if you wanted to, just to beef up the villain quite a bit. And then there's all the campaign cards that came with it, which was really fun to build up your hero over the course of the campaign. I like this campaign just because it's very simple. You simply acquire a new card here and there. It's nothing complicated. You don't have to make a lot of difficult choices, which, while that, I'm not saying that wouldn't be fun, this game is pretty on the simpler side when it comes to that sort of thing. It's not meant to be complicated. It's not meant to be agonizing. So it was nice to just keep, you pick a card and just kind of keep the campaign moving. And I like that style. So that was the first campaign box. They did an excellent job. And like I said, if people were starting to get nervous, I think their faith was restored and rewarded. And then shortly after that, we got another scenario pack in the Once and Future Kang. Now, this one was really cool and really different from anything we'd seen before, where you actually can sort of time travel, and depending on the card that you're dealt, you're going to go to a different era and battle a different Kang when you go to the second stage. And in multiplayer, that's a lot of fun. In solo, it does still change the scenario up somewhat, but it's definitely more fun in multiplayer, this one. And this one definitely increased the difficulty far above anything in the Red Skull box, probably anything we'd seen up to this point. Kang is probably still one of the tougher scenarios to play against, and it takes a while. It's a little bit longer because he just has a lot going on. Sometimes when I'm playing this quest, I always feel like I'm doing something wrong because there are just so many different things happening. And Kang is just a really nasty villain. He's always just getting extra attack or extra threat, so he's always putting more and more pressure on you. He has a lot of cards that beef him up, and he has a lot of cards that weaken you. Some annoying minions. This was a pretty challenging pack, and I think it was a really welcome change to the game, actually. People were definitely starting to feel like the game was maybe a little bit too easy, but it's nice to have something a little bit more challenging to go against every now and then, and this one definitely fulfilled that desire. Now we're going to get to something before too long that maybe takes it a little too far. But at this point in the game, it was nice to have a really challenging, really cool, really different villain who, now that I'm looking at this, I don't think I've ever actually played him on Expert because he's plenty hard enough on Standard. And the thing that really made Kang shine for me is I love modular encounter sets, and his are so cool. Most of them are pretty tough, though. The temporal one's not too bad. It's going to give you, it's more of what we call like a smaller minion encounter set. It's just a lot of weenie guys with some interesting cards. But then when we get into the Anachronauts, these are very, very difficult minions, and they all have nasty boost effects. So they're going to make any villain harder just by including it. And then there's the Master of Time, which is another pretty challenging one where you can actually battle Kang. And he is almost like having another villain on the table. Introduce the villainous keyword, where he gets a boost card when he attacks and schemes. So he was very, very hard to deal with. And so there were just a lot of really cool things going on in this set. I think it was very well received. People were excited. People liked it. And it's still a lot of fun to this day. Now, as we get into the second cycle of heroes, we've gotten a lot of new villains recently. It was time to start looking at some new heroes again. And Ant-Man was the first one in this cycle. And right out of the gate, he was incredibly popular and incredibly fun. His ability to switch multiple times, I wish you could really tell here, but you can't see it on the computer screen. When he changes, his card actually opens up, so his giant size is a double card. It's so much fun. He is a blast to play. His flipping back and forth all the time, and he gets bonuses for doing so. He gets to trigger his abilities to remove threat and deal damage just by changing forms. And he has cards that allow him to change forms more frequently. He has cards that let him draw cards and heal when he changes forms. Army of Ants is an excellent support card to just deal a ton of damage. He has a lot going on. He definitely, one mild criticism is he really, really relies on his helmet. If he doesn't get his helmet out early, it's sort of a different experience depending on if you get that or not. If you get the helmet early, he's amazing. If you don't get the helmet early, he's pretty good. But he is an absolute blast to play. I cannot say enough good things about Ant-Man and highly, highly recommend him. Now, he came as a leadership pack, and he had some pretty good allies. Ant-Man, the Hank Pym version, where you can choose how much you pay for him, which determines how much health he has, a very, very useful ally. Stinger is very, very good just for building a wide board, and she's a very cheap jump blocker, which is always nice. Ronan is cool for Voltron decks. Call for Aid was an okay card with very specific uses. Moxie works very well in the decks where heroes flip a lot or can change forms. Power Gloves is nice again for beefing up. Looks like this was the pack you wanted to get if you wanted to power up the Iron Man ally or the Ronin ally. Have a lot of ally attachments, which has never been a particular style that I've enjoyed too much, but it's very popular. A lot of people really enjoy playing that way. So they were cool cards. It also introduced the team up card for the first time, where if you have Ant-Man and Wasp in play at the same time, you can play these team up cards to get powerful effects. So that was a really neat addition. And he came with Team Building Exercise, which is a hugely, hugely valuable card to have to your collection. Very, very good. Moment of Triumph gave red a way to heal, which was nice. Lay Down the Law is good threat removal for flipping heroes. I don't think Muster Courage really saw much play. I don't even really know what it... Yeah, I don't think we saw a lot of that. It's just kind of expensive. It's a decent card, though. Cestus Situation, I found very difficult to understand what it was for a while, but it is actually a really useful card that you're giving up a card now to have an extra card next turn. Can be very useful in certain heroes. So that was Ant-Man. Like I said, he was very well received and very fun. After that came Wasp, and I'm sad to say I think she was a little less well received because she plays the same way as Ant-Man does, in that she has 3 forms where she also can open up her card to have a giant version. She doesn't really get bonuses from flipping back and forth, and she plays very, very differently. And I think people were put off by that after she came out. Ant-Man was just so much fun just to constantly flip back and forth and do all the crazy things he can do. Wasp is a lot more deliberate, and her flipping is less about doing it during the game and more about when you're doing deck building. You're sort of focusing on one form or the other, and all of it is tied together. She has a very, very powerful alter ego effect where she can shuffle cards back into the deck if they have the mental resource printed on them. So when you build Wasp decks, you tend to fill it with cards with the mental resource, and then you can recycle those cards, which is very, very strong. You can make your combos very potent and very consistent. But her kit is a little bit lacking in that her attack events are excellent, but a lot of her upgrade supports are not that terribly exciting. And she just wasn't as much fun to play out of the box as Ant-Man was, and I think people were pretty let down. Now, I am personally a huge fan of Wasp, and I actually like her more than Ant-Man, but for the deck building and for the alter ego ability. But I totally recognize, as far as just the actual playing of her, she's probably less fun in that way than Ant-Man is. He's really easy to just put down and do fun things with. Wasp, you have to put a little more effort into her, I guess, is maybe a way to put it, but I think it's very well rewarded if you do so. But I think overall, she's not a lot of people's favorite heroes, just from the way I see people talk. Now, as far as her deck building, she came with aggression cards. Her allies were pretty decent. The Wasp ally, the Janet version, can be very, very strong if you have lightning resources in your deck. She can do a lot of damage. She attacks for 3. And here we have the Mighty Thor, Jane Foster. Can be good for some extra damage. Into the Fray was a big card, gave some threat removal to red. Surprise Attack does a good chunk of damage for flipping heroes. Boot Camp was a lot of fun if you're going to do an ally heavy deck. It gives all of your allies +1 attack, so that was very useful. But if you buy Wasp for nothing else, you buy her for the Ironheart basic ally. She's still one of the best cards in the whole game. It's very simple, but it's incredibly, incredibly useful. The Miles Morales ally is also very good. And she, of course, came with the Swarm Tactics team card as well. Oh, and she also came with the Power in All of Us and a Quinn Carrier. Yeah. Even if you don't think Wasp is that much fun to play, she has a lot of really good deck building cards in her pack. Running Interference, I don't think is really very good. All for One. Perseverance is pretty good. That's a good card for flipping heroes. Athletic Conditioning is terrible. Okay, so she has some not very good cards, but she has a lot of excellent cards as well. So I highly recommend Wasp. I'm a big fan. But other people, maybe not as much. The next hero to come out was Quicksilver, and I'm pretty sure I remember him being pretty popular when he first came out. His abilities are very simple. He simply readies over and over and over, and oh my goodness, is it so much fun. He has a very low stat line of 1 thwart, 1 attack, 1 defense, but he has cards that boost all of those stats, and he has an event that boosts them greatly. And he's just all about, he has 4 copies of this Always Be Running. He has ways to shuffle it back into his deck. So he really is kind of one note in that way. And I think if people don't like him, that's probably why. He really is just kind of all about boosting his stats and then readying over and over again, but I think that's a lot of fun. He's a joy to play. Speed Cyclone is an excellent way to slow the villain down. And just upgrading all the stats. Friction Resistance is one of the strongest resource producing cards in the game, where it can ready whenever Quicksilver readies, so he's just always getting his resource card back. Quicksilver is an excellent hero. Highly recommend. Very, very fun to play. Now, he came as a protection hero, and he came with the multiple man ally, which is very interesting because when you play one multiple man, if you have the other two somewhere in your deck or hand, you get to play those for free. But once they go to the discard pile, you don't get to pull them back out again. So multiple man is a really cool ally, and it was exciting to see this little X right here, because I'm pretty sure this was the first person we'd seen from the sort of mutant side of things in Marvel, and we hadn't heard or seen anything about that yet. I might be misremembering somebody, but I remember that we were pretty excited that he was X Factor traded. And but he's really good if you play him early, because you're going to get 3 allies for 4 costs. I know I'm talking a lot about this one card, but I really like him, and I don't think we play him a lot. But because if you don't play him the first time you see him, he becomes less and less useful as you continue to draw him into your hand. So he's an interesting card, but I don't know if he sees much play. I don't think I've ever played Warlock. Never Back Down is a really, really good green card for blocking the attack and then stunning the villain. Sidestep is excellent. This was a very good protection pack. You got some extra armored vests. Nerves of Steel is very good to help pay for all those good protection events like Sidestep and Never Back Down. He also got a team up card with the Scarlet Witch, was pretty cool. They started doing that a little bit more regularly. And then we got the Adrenaline Rush and Civic Duty basic cards, which are pretty useful in heroes that ready a lot. So those were pretty decent. Overall, I think this was a pretty good pack. Sense of Justice is nice to help pay for the thwart events. This is a huge card, actually. Brute Force has seen somewhat of a revival with just a certain type of build. United We Stand was nice to heal a lot of your allies. Yeah, this was a really good pack for the deck building cards as well. Quicksilver, super good. And then we come to the Scarlet Witch, who was sort of the new contender in who's the strongest hero in the game. Right out of the pack, Wanda felt very strong and felt like she could compete with the Captain Marvels and Doctor Stranges of the world. She's right up there with her ability to control the villain and deal a lot of damage. She has a lot of really interesting cards like Chaos Magic that allow her to play any other card for free. Hexbolt, which might be my favorite card in the whole game, where you flip 3 cards off the encounter deck and just deal a bunch of different effects based on the number of boost icons. You never quite know what you're going to get, which I think is a lot of fun. And her ability allows her to sort of somewhat control that, so you can manipulate it towards your benefit most of the time. Molecular Decay does a ton of damage. Warp Reality can cancel. Magic Shield is good for defense. She's one of those heroes that sort of can do it all. The Hexbolt provides her with a potential for stun and confuse, so she can lock the villain down if she gets the right cards to come out. The Crest allows her to manipulate that even more towards her benefit. She does come with 2 obligations, which I guess is meant to slow her down a little bit, but I don't know that it really does. But yeah, Scarlet Witch felt very strong when she came out, and there's going to be, you can put the Sorcerer Supreme in her from the Doctor Strange pack, which really helped. And I'm pretty sure there's other cards in here that boost the Mystics that make her even stronger. As far as her deck building cards, Speed is an okay ally. I haven't played a ton, but Wiccan I think sees a lot of play. One, he's cheap, which is always useful in allies. And his ability, even though it almost always misses, it's always fun to try to deal some damage after he thwarts. Crisis Averted probably gets played more in multiplayer. I don't know. I've never really used that card, but I only really play solo. Multitasking was pretty useful. Yeah, her deck building cards are sort of so-so. Turn the Tide was huge. A way for Justice to deal with minions pretty easily. You get 3 damage just for removing all the threat from a scheme. That is a very, very useful card. She got the team up card. Yeah, Spiritual Meditation. This card right here that you can put in the Mystics that let you draw 2 cards and discard 1. Just instantly made Doctor Strange even better. Makes her even better. Makes another Mystic later on even better. That is just such a good card. With somewhat limited uses, of course, because there's only 3 Mystics in the game, but you always include it when you're playing those guys. Browbeat is just okay. Last Stand is okay sometimes. Bait and Switch. Yeah, these the off aspect cards, not so great. Recuperation, not so great. So her deck building cards, somewhat so-so. So it certainly boosted Mystics and Justice to some degree. But the hero itself is spectacular. She's a very, very strong hero and very fun to play. The game, I will say, now that we're coming to the end of the second cycle, the game was in a really good place at this point. A lot of fun villains and a lot of good heroes. And then along came the Galaxy's Most Wanted and shattered everybody's hopes and dreams.